Hi friends and welcome back. Today's video we are going to do some multicolor layer stamping, which Simon Says Stamp has made super easy for us to do with this gorgeously designed stamp set. The sets that I'm going to be using today is this miniature Happy Birthday stamp set. It has that bunny design, which we're able to layer in images with a different color. And then I'm also going to be using the Argyle Builder Stencil. So these are the two main products I picked out, but I will be adding to it as my design comes together. First, I'm going to start with some Hammermill cardstock cut to 4¼ by 5½, and I'm placing it down onto my Crafty Tacky Mat. I'm going to place the first layer of the stencil down so that way the edges are overhanging my cardstock and I can push that down so my stencil is going to stick to that sticky mat. This does come in super helpful when I have quite a bit of open space or those open areas that could possibly lift up if I were to try and just tape it down. The first color that I'm going to ink blend is cabbage ink. I tapped off some of the excess ink from my brush onto the inside of the lid, and then I'm going to come onto the stencil and blend over all of those open areas, making sure that I'm working the areas left to right and right to left. So that way I'm catching the lip of the stencil too, and I'll have a complete blended design. Then I'm going to carefully peel away this layer of the stencil and I'm going to bring in stencil 2. I'm going to place this over the top and this is going to mask off the areas that we just blended, but also give us a little bit of a border around it as well. So I just eyeballed it to make sure everything was even. Again, pushing that stencil down onto that mat so it sticks in place. And then I'm gonna come in with dusk ink. And when I was tapping it off, it was quite vibrant, a little darker than I really wanted it to be. I also tapped off on a towel that I have off on the side. And when I started ink blending, I, be honest, was a little nervous because it was coming in a little bit darker than I really wanted to. I probably should have started off with the lighter color first, but I just kind of went with it. And I was hoping that as it dries back, it's going to get lighter. So I ink blended that layer of the stencil, removed it, and then I'm placing the third layer of the stencil over the top, which is this stitched pattern. For this one, I'm going to use a cozy ink, which is a nice kind of warm gray color, and it surprisingly stands out really well against that light green. So again, just using a blending brush, kind of tapping off blending brush, tapping off any of my excess ink into the lid and then blending over the entire panel. I'm going to peel that up and I was surprisingly happy with how this turned out. Again, I was a little nervous about that blue, but I thought it worked out really well. Next, I'm going to work on my image. So this image comes off of the Happy Birthday stamp set. The bunny is all of this solid color, and then it has open areas in that solid image where we can customize those colors. And I think this is a really neat and kind of innovative design. So you can really play around with different color combinations. I started by inking up my bunny with gingerbread ink. I stamped it twice and then I'm going to flip the cardstock. And I thought, why not stamp another one since I did have room? I wanted to see what this would look like in a darker brown. So I am going to ink this up with cocoa ink. I'll be honest here, the cocoa was really my favorite. And I think that's actually the one I use in my card project. I really loved that dark brown. Then I lined up the next layer, which is going to be kind of those leaves and some of those flowers. Picked it up with the door of my Misti, and then I'm going to stamp this in, I think this one was Aspen ink. And you could really take some little ink cubes and change up the colors within that design. I just decided to make it a little easier on myself and just do it all in the one color. And then I brought in my panel to see how well that aspen would match with my background and decided to stamp it just one more time to richen that color a little bit. And I'll just flip my cardstock and use that same color for my bunny that I stamped in gingerbread ink. Then we have the heart. So the heart is really kind of what made my deciding factor of which bunny I was going to use. I started by stamping it in Sweets ink. I really kind of wanted a pink in here. Thought Sweets was a really pretty color, but once you stamp it in this solid image, it was almost too hot pink for me. So I cleaned off my stamp, flipped my design, and I decided to come in with Cheeky ink, which I should have just went to right away because it is one of my favorite pinks. I'm going to stamp it twice And that really was the deciding factor of which bunny I was using because I liked the aspen combination with that cheeky ink. I lined up the coordinating die, held it in place with Easy C tape, and die cut out my bunny. I also die cut out the other one, and I'll save that for a future card. And then at first, when I was designing this, I didn't think my bunny was matching my background. I thought it maybe looked like two different types of designs. We have kind of a whimsical floral and then that Argyle background. So, what I decided to do was bring in some greenery. And I'm using the Grand Corner Leaves die set. I just trimmed off some of the excess greenery there because it was almost too big for the size of my bunny. I'm going to trim my stencil background down and I'll do about 3 3/4 by 5 inches. Sometimes this really helps me with card design because if I can just kind of rein in the background a little bit and leave some white space or leave a white margin, that helps me visually and doesn't seem so overpowering. Now I'm going to come back to my leaves and I'm going to do a little bit of ink blending here. I die cut them from the Hammermill cardstock and I wanted these to be kind of a softer color. So I started down at the bottom of the stems with the cabbage ink and a smaller blending brush. And I'm going to ink blend towards the outer edges of the leaves, but kind of fade off as I get to those outer edges. So there will be a little bit of color showing, but it's going to fade off. And I feel like that gives it more of a whimsical and softer effect. I also die cut out a bow, and this comes from the Pretty Bows die set. I'm going to use Cheeky ink, which is the color that I used for my heart. So I started in the center of the bow and then blended my way out towards the edges, again, leaving some white just to have that softness factor. I'm using a sentiment from the Blessings at Easter stamp set. This one says Happy Easter. I'm inking it up in the Versafine ink, which does stay wet for a little bit longer. And since that does stay wet, I decided that I would actually heat emboss. I don't often do this, but it is something that once I do remember to do it, it just adds a little bit of shine to my project. So, stamping that twice, and then I'm going to sprinkle on clear embossing powder. So it's going to look a little cloudy at first. And then once I warm up my heat tool and I melt the embossing powder, it's going to turn my sentiment shiny. I love having coordinating dies for my sentiments. So I line those up, held those down with the Easy C tape and die cut that out. I also die cut it out one more time from white cardstock, and I'm going to layer that together with some liquid glue. That's just going to add a little stability behind the sentiments, which I'll end up popping up on the front of my card. I did also want to add a little bit of lift to my stencil background, but I didn't really want to use foam tape. So I trimmed out a piece of cardstock, it's a heavyweight cardstock, to about the same size as my trimmed background. And I'm attaching those two together with my liquid glue. And then I can go ahead and add this to a white card front that is 4 1/4 by 5 1/2. So I'm going to have just a nice margin. I probably could have actually gone even a little bit smaller with my stenciled background. Then I started putting my bunny together with the leaves. I added a little bit of liquid glue down at the bottom of the stems, tucked that behind the bunny, but figured I better go ahead and get my white panel attached to the card. And that white panel has a stitched edge on it. I die cut it from a master layouts set from Gina K Designs, but you could even just trim a plain piece of cardstock, any one of your dies that might have a stitched edge to it, anything like that. I did go ahead, add some foam tape behind that to pop it up, and now I can come in and finish off attaching my leaves to my bunny. The reason I did that is I really wanted to see where my leaves were sitting with that white panel that I popped in the center. So once I have those leaves attached to behind the bunny, I have my bow. I was going to put it down underneath the heart, but thought it just looked really cute to have the bow kind of popped off on the side so it looks like he or she is wearing a bow. And then I added thin foam squares behind the bunny and added that to my card front. And the sentiments, I'm gonna kind of tuck over there on the side at an angle. It just didn't fit right going across the top for me. And the angled sentiment I just thought was kind of fun and playful. I thought my bow needed a pearl in the center, and then I also added a few white pearls around the sentiment and onto my leaves. And I thought that helped kind of give it more of that whimsical and springtime look since Argyle is sometimes related more to masculine, I feel. I think by adding those colors and the bow and the pearls just help give this more of a spring touch. Now, even though I was actually pretty hesitant when I was creating this card, I am really happy with how this came out with just that single multicolored stamped image. If you're interested in any of the supplies I used today, I will have them linked down below in the video description and over on my blog. Thanks so much for joining me today.